This is something you guys have been requesting the hell out of for a long time. It took me a lot of time, but I finally found a story that takes place not in a school, not in a house, but in an abandoned wing of an old hospital in Pennsylvania. I was 23 years old, fresh out of community college, and desperately needed money. My uncle knew a guy who knew a guy, and that's how I ended up working the overnight janitorial shift at St. Mary's Hospital in eastern Pennsylvania. But St. Mary's wasn't fully operational anymore. The hospital had moved to a newer building back in 2008, but the old building, the original one from 1962, was still standing. They used it for storage and administrative offices during the day. The upper floors were completely abandoned. My job was simple. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I had to mop the first floor hallways, empty the trash cans in the admin offices, and make sure the physical therapy area was clean. I was the only janitor on the night shift. The only other person in the entire old building was a security guard named Frank. But Frank spent 90% of his shift in the front lobby watching a small portable TV. He was 67 years old, overweight, and frankly useless. The first few weeks were fine, boring actually. The old building had that classic hospital smell, bleach, rubber, and something else I could never quite identify. The hallways were lit with those flickering fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. I even started to like the solitude. That changed on a Tuesday night in October. It was around 1:30 a.m. I had just finished mopping the physical therapy area and was pushing my cart toward the supply closet when I heard it. A phone ringing. Not a cell phone. An old-fashioned landline ring, the kind of sharp metallic sound that echoes off tile walls. I stopped my cart and listened. The ringing continued. It was coming from upstairs. Now let me make something clear. The upper floors of St. Mary's, floors 2, 3, and 4, had been sealed off since 2008. The elevators didn't go up there anymore. The stairwell doors were chained shut with heavy-duty padlocks. The hospital administration had told me during orientation that those floors were off-limits and that no one goes up there for any reason. I asked why, and the HR lady just looked at me and said budget cuts. Nothing more. But I knew that wasn't true. The phone kept ringing. I walked to the main stairwell door on the first floor. The door had a sign on it that said restricted access, alarm will sound. But the alarm had been disconnected years ago. Frank told me that on my first night. He said, "Don't worry about that sign. That thing hasn't worked since Obama was president." I put my ear against the door. The ringing was definitely coming from above. Floor 2 or floor 3? I couldn't tell. Then, after about 45 seconds, the ringing stopped. I told myself it was nothing. Old building, old wiring, phones still connected somewhere. Probably a robocall. Yeah, a robocall to a phone that hadn't been touched in 15 years. I went back to my cart and finished my shift. I didn't mention it to Frank. He would have just laughed at me. The next night, the same thing happened. 1:30 a.m., phone ringing from upstairs. This time, I was in the admin office when I heard it. I walked to the stairwell again. The ringing was louder this time, more urgent. And this time, I could tell exactly which floor it was coming from. Floor 3. I stood there for almost 2 minutes, just listening. Then, as before, the ringing stopped. I couldn't sleep the next morning. I went home and started researching St. Mary's old building on my phone. It took me about an hour, but I found something. In 1995, a patient on the 3rd floor, a man named Leonard Cross, had died under suspicious circumstances. According to a local news article I found buried in an online archive, Leonard was a 47-year-old man admitted for psychiatric evaluation. He had no family, no visitors, no history of violence. But one night, he somehow got out of his room, made it to the 3rd floor nurse's station, and picked up the phone. When a nurse answered, Leonard whispered, "They're coming for me. Tell my daughter I'm sorry." Then he hung up. 20 minutes later, Leonard Cross was found dead in his room. The cause of death was listed as sudden cardiac arrest, but the article hinted that the hospital had settled a lawsuit with Leonard's daughter out of court. The article also mentioned that room 304, Leonard's room, had been permanently sealed shortly after his death. I closed my phone and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I almost called in sick that night, but I needed the money. So I went in. 10 p.m. came and went. 11 p.m. Midnight. No ringing. I started to relax. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe Frank was playing a prank on me. At 1:30 a.m. on the dot, the phone rang again. But this time was different. This time it wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from the admin office, from the landline phone on the desk, a phone that had never rung once in the 3 weeks I had worked there. I walked into the admin office. The phone was sitting on the desk. The caller ID just said, room 304. I felt my blood go cold. My hands started shaking. I stared at that phone for what felt like an eternity. It just kept ringing. 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 I remember thinking, just walk away, just leave, go get Frank. But my feet wouldn't move. And then, and this is the part I still have nightmares about, I picked it up. There was no voice at first, just static, a low, crackling static that sounded almost like breathing. I said hello, no response. I said hello again, louder this time, and then someone answered. It was a man's voice, quiet, raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. And he said, "They're coming for me. Tell my daughter I'm sorry." I dropped the phone. It hit the desk and the line went dead. I stood there in complete darkness. I didn't even realize the lights had flickered off. I ran. I ran faster than I have ever run in my entire life. I burst through the front lobby and Frank looked up from his TV and asked what the hell was wrong with me. I couldn't even form words. I just pointed toward the admin office. Frank grabbed his flashlight and walked back there with me. The phone was still on the desk. The receiver was dangling off the edge. Frank picked it up. He listened for a few seconds. Then he put it down and looked at me. He said, "There's no dial tone. This phone hasn't been connected to anything in 10 years. I quit that job the next morning. I didn't even give 2 weeks' notice." Frank called me a few days later and told me something that still keeps me up at night. He said after I left, he got curious. He went upstairs. Not alone, he brought 2 of his buddies from the night shift at the new hospital. They cut the chains on the 3rd floor stairwell door and went to room 304. The door was still sealed, still chained shut from the outside. The chains were rusted, the padlock was covered in dust. No one had opened that door in years. But Frank said, and he swore on his mother's grave this was true, through the small window in the door, he could see inside the room. The bed was made, the sheets were white and clean. And on the nightstand next to the bed, the phone was off the hook. Frank and his buddies left immediately. None of them ever went back up there. The old St. Mary's building was finally demolished in 2022. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that ringing. And I still hear that voice. They're coming for me. Tell my daughter I'm sorry. The most disturbing part? I looked up Leonard Cross's daughter after that night. She died in 2004. She was never able to hear her father's apology, and I still don't know who or what I was talking to on that phone. That phone call will forever echo in my mind, and I know, no matter how many years pass, I will never ever pick up a ringing phone again.